And I'm going to welcome everyone in. Welcome to everyone joining today's press conference on metals mining in Virginia. The program will start momentarily. Thank you so much for being here. Please remember to keep your line muted during today's press conference, which is being recorded. If you do not wish to appear on camera, please turn your camera off at this time. The information shared in today's press conference will be distributed to all registrants after the close of the program. During today's press conference, if you have any questions, please place them in the chat, as we do have a Q&A portion of today's program. We're going to go ahead and start the program. I want to welcome everyone again for joining. My name is Jessica Sims. I'm the Virginia Field Coordinator for Appalachian Voices. And we're very thankful to have you here today to discuss this issue. Today's program will include multiple speakers, including Stephanie Rinaldi, the Coalition Coordinator for the Press Pause Coalition, Dan Holmes, the Director of State Policy at the Piedmont Environmental Council, a message from Delegate Simonds of the 94th District, and to update, Deacon Shelton is not able to attend. Again, we will have our speakers, and then we will close with questions and answers at the end of the program. I encourage anyone with questions to please place them in the chat, which we will be monitoring. I will now pass it to Stephanie Rinaldi of the Press Pause Coalition.
Thank you, Jess. As Jess said, my name is Stephanie Rinaldi. I am a resident of Buckingham County, and I'm the coordinator of the coalition we are introducing today. Being in Buckingham County means I don't yet have that fancy broadband internet. So if there are any issues with my audio or my video, I'll just ask Jess to jump in and let me know, and I will get that sorted. So many of you may remember around this time last year, there were murmurs of exploration for gold in Virginia. And what followed was swift and necessary action by a few of the Commonwealth's environmental organizations. That action led the General Assembly to require a study on the impacts of industrial gold mining in Virginia. And since the passing of that legislation, those murmurs of gold exploration have given way to news that the industry is now exploring for other metals. And that news has brought even more of Virginia's environmental organizations to the issue. So that news was that the same Canadian junior mining company that found gold here in Buckingham, Aston Bay Holdings, has already started drilling in Pittsylvania County and exploring in Campbell County in search of copper, lead, and zinc. Now, those metals and gold are all mined in a similar way, that is by digging massive open pits that extend well below the water table and expand to encompass hundreds of acres. They create immense piles of mine waste and they hold it back by earthen dams. And they create huge purpose-built ponds for storing the toxic solutions used to extract metals from ore. The depths of these mines requires dewatering, which can draw down the water table. The earthen dams often fail, releasing a torrent of polluted waste into the surrounding area, and the toxic ponds that they build are also known to leach into the ground, polluting the soil and the groundwater. The most troubling issue with these kinds of mines is that they could have devastating impacts on Virginia's drinking water. Here in rural Virginia, we're very aware that our water comes from the ground. We're all on well water out here, and many Virginians get their drinking water from the James River and other tributaries. And all of those sources of drinking water would be threatened by metals mining. The knowledge that Aston Bay has expanded their exploration was the catalyst for the formation of this coalition that is now working to protect Virginia communities, public health, and environment from metals mining. This new coalition is called the Press Pause Coalition, as we are seeking to press pause on the permitting of metals mines in the Commonwealth. Currently, there are about 10 state and local organizations working together, including Friends of Buckingham, Appalachian Voices, Piedmont Environmental Council, and Southern Environmental Law Center. Each of these organizations that are working with the coalition have determined that Virginia is not prepared for the metals mining industry, which is the reason for the legislation that we will announce in a bit. And it's also the reason that the environmental community encouraged the study of gold mining, which I do have a few updates about. So as I mentioned, the General Assembly has required a study on the impacts of gold mining and the health and safety and welfare of Virginians in relation to that industry. That requirement was formalized in March of this year with Governor Northam's signature, and the study is set to begin this week on Wednesday. The results of the study are due December 1st of 2022, so just 1 year for the study. The state has contracted the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine to conduct the technical portion of the study, and then they will form, the state will also form its own committee that will be made up of state agency officials and impacted community members. So the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, which I'm going to call the NAS, that study will be conducted by a committee of experts in fields related to gold mining. And this summer, the NAS put out a call for nominations for experts they might appoint to the study committee. Organizations that are now part of this coalition nominated leading experts in the fields of aqueous geochemistry, geology, economics, and mine engineering. And importantly, all of the experts nominated by these organizations have experience working with communities impacted by mining. None of those experts were selected for the committee. The NAS instead selected experts who have obvious vested interests in the mining industry and who do not appear to have any notable experience working with communities or individuals impacted by mining. But the members of the committee are still provisional. So the coalition and its partners have submitted comments to the NAS, noting that the committee is imbalanced and requesting a review of the committee's makeup. We hope that those comments are taken seriously and that the NAS will add to their committee experts who will keep the best interests of Virginians in mind. This study is an important first step to understanding exactly what it would mean for Virginians if gold mining and mining of other metals were allowed to move forward. The public is welcome to attend the initial meeting of the NIS Study Committee on Wednesday. And that is a virtual meeting, and I will put a link to that in the chat. And I'll also put a link to the NIS page about the study. And that page outlines exactly what the study will be doing. What the study may or may not address is the legacy of gold mining that already exists here in Virginia. And to learn more about that, we have Dan Holmes from Piedmont Environmental Council here. He probably knows more about this topic than he would like to, so I will hand it over to him now.
Thanks, Stephanie. My name is Dan Holmes. I'm the Director of State Policy for the Piedmont Environmental Council. Just a little background on the organization. We represent a 9-county region extending from Loudoun down to Albemarle County, representing Piedmont counties. Our mission broadly is promoting and protecting the natural resources, rural economy, history, and beauty of that region. And in doing so, one cannot begin on that mission without understanding some of the legacy contamination that's occurred in our region, or some of the legacy contamination that's left over in our region from some of the historic practices that have occurred. One of those being gold mining. And in reviewing the current issue as it relates to gold mining in Virginia, obviously there's a lot of focus on the gold pyrite belt. That belt extends through our region, picking up 3 or 4 of our counties. Matter of fact, some of our historic towns even have a touch back to the history of their of that mining, and like Gold Vein in Fauquier County. So obviously a lot of activity occurred in this region roughly between early 1800s through, I'd say, around 1940. In looking at what we're dealing with in our region right now, based on the historic gold mining, one site came to light very recently when a large development was proposed for the site. And upon review of that 2,600 acres, and this is in Orange County, we found no less than 5 named mines were associated with that property, some 15 mine sites specifically, as well as a lot of prospecting that had occurred there. It's important to mention that none of these sites are currently reclaimed or cleaned up. These are all continuing to cause issues with the environment, the local environment in that area, as well as water quality of some of our major waterways, including the Rapidan and Rappahannock rivers. Matter of fact, one of those sites was known as the Vaucluse mine. And the reason why I'm highlighting this is more gold was extracted from that mine than any other mine in Virginia. And when you look at the ways that they used to extract the gold from the ore, you're looking at a couple different ways. One was mercury and the other was cyanide leaching. The mercury contamination at this particular site is one of the it's probably one of the worst that we've seen in our region. Matter of fact, the records from the Virginia Department of Energy suggest in 1988, when the site inspection was done on this property, suggest that it should be investigated for a Superfund cleanup. We've contacted EPA and can find no trace of whether or not it's ever been investigated for that, as well confirmed that at this time, none of those mine sites have been reclaimed. In the case of Vaucluse mine, we happen to know that there's a 60-foot tailings pit in the middle of one of our streams. It is still there today. As a matter of fact, it's been discussed as having the appearance of a beaver pond. This is no beaver pond. It's probably some of the most toxic, acid mine drainage and mercury and other contaminants that you would expect coming from this property. And like I said, that's still in the middle of one of our tributaries that ultimately empties into the Rapidan River. That assessment was done in 1988. Now in 2010, the Rapidan River, that segment of the Rapidan River was listed as impaired for mercury. So we literally have a document that says in 1988 that this property had a extreme contamination hazard from mercury, and a subsequent listing of an impairment of a waterway. And yet here we are in almost 2022, and that site still remains unreclaimed. Now, this is the toxic legacy of historic gold mining that occurred. And while I don't want to say that we're still using mercury today, some of the same issues related to the storage of waste still are present. Acid mine drainage is a major concern, especially in a lot of the metal minings that we're looking at. I also want to mention there's a reason why there's a renewed interest in this type of mining in Virginia. And anybody can look at the spot price of gold and what's occurred over the last couple of years and really get an idea of why all of a sudden people are knocking at our door. Prior to 2019, I want to say gold was trading roughly below $1,200 an ounce. It's now over closer to $1,800, and I believe at one point, even in the last 6 months, it was up at $2,000 per ounce. So anytime the price goes up for these types of metals, the interest in mining will go up as well. Now, we talk about the gold pyrite belt, but obviously there's a lot of, let's just say, interest of mining companies for other types of metals in Virginia. And I think that the prices of those metals will also drive the interest. One of the things that we've looked at is lithium. I know there's renewed interest in North Carolina for lithium mining. And while it doesn't occur in our region, again, this concern more broadly related to metals mining is obviously, I would say, growing based on what we're seeing with regard to the supply and demand related to some of these metals, specifically those tied to, say, battery production. So we're looking at this issue more broadly across our region, not just as it relates to gold and other, what you would expect to find in the gold pyrite belt, but also looking at other types of geological formations to understand or have a better understanding of what industries may be coming to our door. And with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Stephanie.
Sure. And I want to just mention the questions that are coming in the chat. Thank you for those. And we will get to those at the Q&A. And Jess, I think, are you sharing a video with us?
Yes, I am. So thanks so much, Stephanie. And yeah, thanks for the questions in the chat. Stacy Lovelace, our chair of our legislative subcommittee, is monitoring that, and we will get to those in the Q&A section. I first wanted to mention again, we intended to have another member of the community here today, but unfortunately Deacon Shelton was not able to make it. Stephanie lives in Buckingham, where exploration is ongoing, and as Dan mentioned, he's in Orange, which has already been impacted by this industry. So during Q&A, both would be more than happy to answer questions regarding community impacts. There's also a great video on the Friends of Buckingham website that highlights the concerns of many Buckingham community members, which will be part of the materials that we share with you after this. So wanted to go ahead and share with you a message that is being sent today by Delegate Shelly Simonds, who represents the 94th District. And then after that, we will switch to Q&A. So bear with me as I switch us over to that program, part of the program. And let me adjust those settings really quickly. All right.
This is Delegate Shelly Simonds. I represent Newport News, 94th District in the Virginia House. And I'm sorry I can't be with you all today, but I wanted to share an important announcement with you. I will be carrying legislation to analyze regulation of copper, zinc, and lead mining in Virginia and pause any permitting for large-scale mining of gold, copper, lead, and zinc operations in the Commonwealth until such analysis is complete. Why is this important? Industrial scale metals mining is very land intensive, and the process results in perpetual acid mine drainage into our waterways. Metal mining is the nation's #1 toxic polluter. Why are we concerned about this now? Industrial metals mining is moving forward in the Commonwealth without a comprehensive regulatory framework, putting public health and the environment at risk. Prospecting companies are swiftly pursuing other metals such as copper, zinc, and lead, and there is great urgency for broader analysis of existing regulations. Last year's legislation, HB 2213, started a crucial review process, establishing a work group to evaluate the impact of gold mining on public health, safety, and welfare, but it does not evaluate the impacts of copper, zinc, and lead. That's why more legislation is needed and a pause on permitting is needed for these metals. The threat of large-scale mining is truly Virginia-wide. It affects everyone across the Commonwealth because the geological belt containing gold and other metals spans the state. Large-scale gold and copper mining have not occurred in the Commonwealth for 75 years, while lead and zinc mining have not occurred for 40 years. This belt, a geological structure containing these metals, crosses the James River, a source of drinking water for 2.7 million people, and intersects innumerable Virginia communities, many of which are environmental justice communities. These operations would have both short and long-term impacts on our communities. So existing bonding, reclamation, closure, and monitoring regulations must be comprehensively evaluated and updated. To support communities most at risk, we must pause the permitting process for metals mining, study the effects of such mining, and the General Assembly needs to address this issue urgently. Many of you may remember the uranium mining fight we had 10 years ago. We were successful in placing a moratorium. I think that we need to use many of those same arguments in terms of protecting people now and protecting our children and our grandchildren from future pollution. Many of these mining processes involve dangerous chemicals and leave toxic tailings behind that need to be monitored for hundreds of years. And I know I don't want to leave that legacy to our children and great-grandchildren. So I really appreciate the conservation community fighting with us to make sure that we don't allow multinational companies coming in from Canada to exploit our resources and leave us with a mess forever, indefinitely, to monitor and clean up. So thank you so much for your time, and I really look forward to working with you on this important issue.
And thank you to Delegate Simonds for sharing that message today. I want to go ahead and put it over to Stacy Lovelace, who is the chair of the Legislative Subcommittee for the Press Pause Coalition, to begin our Q&A.
Thanks, Jess. Hi, all. So we'd like to open the floor to representatives of the media and legislator offices to ask questions. Please feel free to put those in the chat and I'll go ahead and get started. We have one. When did they start drilling and where in Pittsylvania County? How much are they drilling for and how much do they plan to mine?
Okay, several questions. I am going to put right now in the chat a link to Aston Bay Holdings website, specifically to their press release when they started drilling in Pittsylvania County. They call it the Mountain Project, I think. I don't remember the name that they've given the project, but the release that I just put in the chat, there's a map at the bottom. It doesn't have any locations listed, but we were able to figure out where that was based on landmarks. I unfortunately don't have our version of the map in front of me right now, but you can get more information from their website about when they started and their plans going into the future. I believe the press release they published just after this one mentions more land that they've gotten access to. So definitely go through those releases and check it out. They actually share a lot of information with us, which is quite nice, actually. Let me see if I can answer any of the other questions. How much are they drilling? I'm not sure. I believe they only have one drill at the moment, so they are currently moving it around to different locations. Another source for information is Aston Bay's Twitter. They often post videos of their CEO talking about their programs. And in terms of how much do they plan to mine, we don't know yet. Aston Bay is a junior mining company, which means they are an exploration company. We don't know what their plans are once they have found what they're looking for. Here in Buckingham, they have said that they've found enough gold that makes them think that they could potentially have a mine the size of the Hale mine that is in North Carolina. They have not yet made any similar comments about their zinc, copper, and lead findings.
Thanks, Stephanie. We have another. You mentioned that there was legislation passed last year on the issue of gold mining. How does the legislation differ this year?
Last year's legislation was specific to gold mining because at that time we were aware only of exploration looking for gold. Once we found out that they are also looking for copper, lead, and zinc, we drafted this new legislation, which is similar to last year's, but this year we are focusing on this moratorium, this pause that we want to put on the permitting, because while we are very appreciative that Virginia is studying the effects of gold, and while we believe that we should also be looking into the effects of these other metals as they're mined, we really want to focus on pausing the permitting so that we can do that due diligence.
Okay. You mentioned a new coalition. Can you give a little more detail on the goal of the coalition and which organizations are working with it?
Yes, so the goal of the coalition is to broadly to protect Virginians from the effects of metals mining, specifically by pressing pause on permitting. I'll go back to the organizations that I listed, which were Friends of Buckingham, Appalachian Voices, Piedmont Environmental Council, Southern Environmental Law Center, There are a few more. They are listed on the coalition website, which is presspauseva.org. They're all listed on the homepage there, and you can also find other resources there to learn more about what we're doing and just about the issue in general.
We have these new metals, copper, zinc, and lead. How similar are the operations to the gold operations?
From what we know, they are very similar. Dan, give me a nod if you have more information, but as I understand it, they are mined in almost exactly the same way. Yeah, okay. So what we learn from the gold study hopefully will inform some of the decisions made about these other metals, but that's just a hope at this point because we're not in charge of the study. So any other questions?
This question is for Dan. You mentioned price of the metals. What impacts do you foresee, metal prices having on the future of mining in Virginia?
Well, it's just, someone mentioned uranium earlier, and I'm drawing, a parallel to that conversation. For those that followed that issue, there was an interest in the 80s to mine uranium in Virginia. That's because largely there was a price spike, a corresponding price spike then. And then the bottom dropped out of the pricing for uranium, spot pricing. And basically it fell below $20 a pound in that case. And what we saw with the renewed interest in uranium mining in the early, I'd say to mid aughts of 2000, was largely tied to a price spike back up to over $100 a pound. That happened, and all of a sudden we again had companies knocking on the door saying we want to pursue this. It's no different. Again, there's a profitable, what makes a mine profitable? Obviously, a lot of that's tied into what it takes to extract that, what regulations you have to meet during that process. And in this case, it's not hard to expect with a price jump in gold from $1,200 to over $1,800. Again, that's a pretty large jump in the price that's being paid per ounce. That companies would then find it profitable to mine here in Virginia. I think one of the things that we saw again going back to uranium. There was a push to mine uranium. The price dropped below what many would consider it to be profitable, which is around, I think, $54. I think was what people were estimating the profit when it would become profitable to mine in Virginia. The minute it dropped below that price point, the push became much less intense. The interests, not saying they went away, but definitely we didn't have people beating down the door trying to get through with that type of activity. I would expect something similar here. When pricing drops, the interest of these companies might go. But that speaks more to a boom bust cycle that I want to highlight here as it relates to mining. One of the concerns we have is when the price is up, people come in, they mine. When the price goes down, they kind of stop mining, and those sites remain open. And they don't. Shutting down a mine is not something that happens every day. So in those periods when there's not an interest, again, making sure that those sites are stable, making sure that they're not harming the environment or the public health is going to be important. And as I've already tried to talk about today, even though these are historic gold mines, we haven't even cleaned up the ones that occurred, from our past. And we can look at modern mining operations too, and draw some parallels as far as concerns about, if and when these sites would be cleaned up if they no longer are profitable. So like I said, a lot is tied to that price.
Thanks, Dan. We have one more, I believe. This is the last that I'm seeing. You mentioned uranium, and Virginia has already addressed uranium mining. Will these operations have similar impacts to the uranium mining?
Well, obviously the contamination is a little bit different. The constituents that you're worried about for uranium mining may not be the exact same for gold. I'm not going to try to suggest, though, that you're not going to see, again, it's about what is alongside of that ore that really is going to tie into some of the process for extracting it. So again, I would say, no, you're not going to have the radiological contaminants, at least not at the levels as if you were mining uranium. However, the real issue is, what is the toxicity and how long do you have to store it or keep it out from interaction with the public, or for that matter, the environment. And even though uranium tailings ponds and pits have to be managed for much longer periods of time, the fact remains, even here with metal mining, you're talking about hundreds of years of ensuring that there's not potential release.
Thanks. So those are all the questions that I see. Do any folks have any other questions before I pass it back to Jess? Okay. Jess, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks so much, Stacy. I want to thank everyone again for being here today and their attendance, and to our speakers, Stephanie Rinaldi and Dan Holmes, and to Delegate Simonds for the message that she has sent today. So we will send information out with some of the links that were included in the chat. And if you have further questions, you are invited to reach out to the Press Pause Coalition at presspauseba@gmail.com. And that website is also in the chat, where you can learn more and see some of the resources that are available to help educate on this issue, which is presspauseba.org. So at this time, we will stop the recording and end today's press conference. Thanks again so much for being here.
Thank you, everyone.